Hi, everyone. Welcome to Coasters and Community, the podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Johnston, and we're talking how to build a brand in the theme park community. Each week, we hear from influencers, planners, vloggers, journalists, each as they share their own experience about building their brand within this community. Today, we talked to Amanda Bonner, better known as Me and the Magic, across various social media platforms. Amanda has built a successful brand around solo theme park travel, creating both a community and a podcast, and I'm excited to talk with her about how she did that. Let's go. So I primarily know you from what you post on Instagram, but I know there's more to Me and the Magic, the brand. What all does that brand actually encompass?
Goodness. Well, me and the Magic encompasses really, I love connecting people. I love sharing people's stories, and I love travel, and it really is for the solo traveler. So I love our community. We've got a really great community on Facebook. Obviously, the podcast, I love doing it. Just hit episode 106. So love doing that. And then we have some group trips coming up, one this year and one next year. I do monthly in-person meetups around the Orlando area, and then we have some virtual Zoom calls as well. And really, I'm just trying to give people inspiration to get out there, don't wait, go on that solo trip, feel confident, safe, whatever the concerns are, address those.
To make sure we know just off the top, what platforms are you on?
I am on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm now on Threads,
Okay. Yeah.
which is the newest. And I'm on Pinterest, although that a whole lot of action on Pinterest. And I don't have YouTube yet, considering that. And of course, I've got Amanda at meandthemagic.com and also Google voicemail.
Okay. All right, cool. So let's go all the way back. And I want to talk about how we got to kind of that focus on solo travel.
Sure.
So in this case, and just make sure I understand contextually, are we talking about solo theme park travel, or are we talking about just solo travel in general? I know theme park, I know Disney is a big focus, but is it more broad than that?
Now it is, and I'll kind of tell you how it started. I used to live in New York City, so I've been in Florida 5 years now. But before that, I knew what it was like to miss coming to Walt Disney World and want to come down. And I hadn't been in several years, and then I came with friends in 2012, and I was ready to turn back around, go back right away. And they said, "Oh, we've got jobs, we have other responsibilities." And I thought, well, what if I go by myself? And I started to look online about 2013, 14, and there were, of course, hardly any resources for solo travelers, let alone adults only. It was geared toward families,
Yeah.
which is to be expected. So I thought this idea started percolating. What if I were to do something geared towards people wanting to go solo to Walt Disney World? And that's how it all started.
Gotcha. Okay. So that makes more sense. I was kind of wondering what the pivot point was from, hey, this is something I enjoy doing, and then we get to the actual branding part. Now you haven't always been Me and the Magic, correct?
That is correct. So when I first started out, I thought this was just going to be about Disney. And my mentor, I don't know if you know Lou Mangello with WDW Radio.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very well-known podcast in the Disney realm,
Yeah,
especially.
he's been around for a while.
Yes, yes. So he usually talks on his podcast about how he has this momentum workshop and he has weekly mastermind groups. And I had never met Lou. I just listened to his podcast. I emailed him with my idea about this. What if I had some website, or at the time I was just thinking a blog, not just, but that was good because podcasting I knew nothing about. So I'll do a blog. I can write. And he loved the idea. And I said, what if I joined your weekly mastermind? And so we talked about that. And then I ended up 2.5 years in his weekly mastermind. During that time, I formed Disney Travel for All. That was 2018. I also moved to Florida. Probably not a coincidence. And then after a while, I wasn't getting that connection. And so then I started the community and I started the podcast in January 2020. which was kind of a rough time to start a podcast
Yeah.
because of what happened right after that with the pandemic.
So
But in a way, it was good because the community really formed too, with more people wanting that connection and being kind of, confined to their homes.
talk to me about the community part. How did when you say you focused on creating a community from a practical perspective, how did you accomplish that?
Gosh, I think that I sought different ways to connect with people, wanting their input, um, having the Zoom calls.
And this is all around the basis of solo travel?
It was Disney Travel for All was for adults and solo travelers coming
Okay.
to Disney destinations, primarily Walt Disney World, but I was also covering heavily Disney cruises and some Disneyland. And then I did a little trip to Vero Beach and, was trying to cover some of that as well. But since
Okay.
I lived in Tampa and now Orlando, I primarily was covering Walt Disney World. And I think a big part of it were people at the time who couldn't get down here because of the pandemic or whatever the reason was, just wanting to see that and appreciating whatever I could share with them. But then, just little things like WandaVision came out on Disney Plus. And I said, what if we do some weekly Zoom calls after each episode?
Mm,
Because I love the MCU, but I am not a Marvel Comics person. I just didn't grow up with that, don't know it.
yeah.
And we had this little tight knit group of like 10 people that every week we were on these calls. And I recently did the 100th episode and had members of the community on. And everybody who was on those calls, they said that was their favorite memory from being involved with the
Really?
community the past few years.
Well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
When you say you reached out to these folks, did you do that through was that a Facebook, an Instagram kind of thing?
Mostly, I think at the time, mostly Facebook, although numbers being whatever they are higher on Instagram. And I think I have a good um, back and forth with people on Instagram too through messages, although there's certainly a lot of overlap.
And you said you started the podcast once you felt like you had an audience.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of really great Disney podcasts out there. There aren't as many that are maybe just women talking, and I think that appealed to some other women. My audience is probably at least 2/3 women, and I've had some women mention that to me that they appreciated hearing another woman's point of view who's traveling solo and going to Disney and all of that. And then I've had certainly guests on the show that people said that's how they found me too, by being already familiar with those different guests and then tuning into my podcast and joining the community that way.
Okay. So early on, the focus was the podcast. Is that where you
Since 2020 I started the podcast, yeah, that is my number one, and I think that and the community remain my top priorities.
Okay. All right. So you start the community, you start the podcast. Um, what was the, and I think you kind of hinted around it, but what was the overarching goal at the time? Where were you trying to get to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when I started the podcast, I was trying to grow more of an audience. So at the time, I thought I wanted to write a book. And since then, that's pivoted more to some other ideas. Now, very high on my priority list is going to be Patreon soon, because I would like to monetize this. It is a business. I
Yeah.
have created an LLC.
So
So,
there was a business goal, I guess is what I'm getting at,
yes,
that you could
I
kind of
have
build
a
around.
business plan with certain goals for the podcast, that I can attract advertisers and sponsorships, with the podcast, and offer certain benefits to listeners. I've done some giveaways. I'd love to do even bigger giveaways, and just keep, the more listeners I have, I feel like the more people that are being inspired to travel solo and are sharing it out with more people. And just, I love that idea of just connecting more people that maybe feel like they're alone in this feeling of not knowing what to do when they want to travel solo and having these fears about it.
Gotcha. Well, okay. It's kind of amazing to think that you basically built your own group to market to. That's really impressive.
Yeah, and I mean, I get so much out of the community too. You know, we do monthly walk the worlds where we'll meet up and walk around and just I live by myself, and so it's one way for me to connect with people locally, and then also virtually. And then we've got people coming on the cruise for our first group cruise in November, and it's just really amazing to me that people want to come on vacation with me. You know,
Yeah, that's the thing. I saw that and I thought, wow, that's amazing. Um,
yeah.
what were your when you first started? What were the worries at the time for you? What were your concerns?
Well, one, you and I were talking earlier that I have a full time job, so I wanted to deliver something that was a quality product, but also I didn't know anything. I was green as could be, and the
Hmm.
amount of time just to learn it all and figure out the priorities, because as we
Yeah.
talked about all the social media platforms and the email and the community and even producing the podcast, I mean, it all takes a lot of time and little bits. And now I'm in a good rhythm, obviously, after 100 something podcast episodes, but
Yeah.
it takes a while to get comfortable with all that.
So you really had kind of a niche idea. Were you worried at all about saturation as it relates to Disney content that's available on social media? Was that ever a concern?
Not saturation as much as avoiding that comparison
Hmm.
monster, because and finding kind of my unique voice, which I think is part authenticity and part inspiration and sharing other people's stories and just doing it in my way, and not trying to copy anybody else, although sometimes there are certain similarities, no doubt, with other people out there.
To me, or for me, that's a huge barrier to entry mentally. Because there are some, especially now in 2023, not so much, if you're around in like 2000, whatever, six, seven, even, or, even back beyond that, there just wasn't a whole lot of, relative to today, there wasn't a whole lot of Disney content, Disney creators, that kind of thing. It just wasn't as much of a thing. And so now it's just you say, okay, I'm going to try this in this space. And there's just so much, what you can only perceive as competition, that it's really hard to step back and say, hey, I'm just going to do me.
Yes, but also there's a great opportunity because you've got a large built-in audience that you can possibly, um, get their attention in different ways.
That's correct. The distribution is unlike anything it's ever been before, the
Yeah,
distribution opportunity. You're right.
yeah,
So now we move from the focus on Disney adults, Disney solo, and you rebrand.
right.
Was it last year?
It
Correct.
was it was last fall. I started the process probably last spring, summer. And part of that was, I used to live in New York City. I was going back to New York City and going on other trips, and I was sharing travels beyond Disney. And then I found Dollywood.
Yes.
And I fell in love with Dollywood. And, I had these ideas that I'd kind of gotten away from just the solo travel aspect. And that really had been why I started it all in the first place. And then also, I realized that it's kind of tricky to have a business name with Disney in it when you're not officially Disney. And I actually had a book idea. The book title was going to be Me and the Magic, and might still be. But I then thought, oh, what a good name for uh, the new business, so to speak. So I decided to pivot and really focus strictly on solo travel for various destinations, not just Disney. But I live in Orlando. I still love Disney, and I'm going on Disney cruise in November, so there's still no shortage of Disney.
But it was a refocus. It was a
Yeah.
rebrand to focus back on solo, but also at the same time be able to kind of broaden if you needed to.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going next month to Indianapolis. I'm going to Minneapolis for the first time. So excited to share tidbits from those. When I did Dollywood last year, I did a big fall road trip of, I think it ended up being
Yeah.
16 days. Then I went Florida through the Carolinas, Tennessee to Indiana, where I'm originally from, and back down. And it was great. And so I shared a lot through all that.
So let's talk about Instagram for a minute. Instagram, Facebook. there, what kind of content do you enjoy publishing?
I really enjoy putting music to photos or videos. It just takes me a while, unfortunately. I mean, and sometimes, you strike gold and you have no clue why. Like I put up 15 seconds of me standing in the Smoky Mountains, no no music, nothing, and that is my most popular reel by
Yeah,
far. No clue
yeah.
why. you know. But I do really enjoy the reels aspect, and I also like the interactive aspects more in stories.
How much does what you like to publish versus what you've seen is trending or gets views? Which of those kind of influence what you actually publish?
Sometimes I'll see what's trending, and if I feel like it fits me and my brand and my audience, then I'll try it. But I also really, I have no poker face. So if I try some of these things
Uh,
and look like an idiot, I'm just going to laugh through it.
yeah,
Like the trend, which I think maybe has died out now, but of people who are lip syncing to different movie quotes or this or
yeah,
that. I have never done
yeah,
that. I probably never will do that. It's just not me. No offense to anyone who does
yeah.
it, but it's not me.
Do you find that it's important to inject your personality into your content?
I have to.
Yeah,
I don't know any other way to do it, and that's what makes you unique too. It's kind of like, I guess, when you're dating, you want to find the person who wants to find
yeah,
you. So
yeah.
it's the same way with social
No, that makes
media.
sense.
Yeah.
And I asked that because there's just so many times, and I'm sure everybody goes through this, that you kind of have a story you want to tell, or a view that you or an opinion you want to get across. Maybe not even
hmm
controversial, but you almost you start to hit that publish button. And you think, oh, do I really want to show this piece of me?
Absolutely. And there have been a few times that I certainly shared some opinions that were controversial, or I don't even know controversial,
Yeah,
but um, yeah,
yeah,
provocative maybe. But then they also have really resonated with people, and I really appreciate that. Like one of my podcast episodes is My Big Secret, episode 89, and it's meant to be a provocative title. And then, but that episode by far, I've gotten the best feedback from people who really just connected to it, and that's why I put it out there. So
Where do you get your content ideas for your podcast, for Instagram, Facebook?
some of it is certainly listener feedback and the community feedback. I often put polls and questions in the community. Um, Sometimes I'm inspired by someone I'm following online. Sometimes it's something that I'm very interested in. Like I had a friend that went to Alani, and I'm thinking about that, so I interviewed
Yeah,
him about that experience. It just really varies. And then sometimes too, I will look at do research, especially when I pivoted more to solo travel in general. I looked at what are people's top concerns about solo travel, and
yeah,
safety is certainly a big one. So I, have done an episode on that. Budget is certainly a big one. I've done an episode on that, and there'll be more coming on that too.
gotcha. So, do you feel like at this point you know your audience pretty well?
I hope so. Yeah, I do. I feel like I do. Yeah.
Do you feel like you have a very solidified overarching brand strategy for Me and the Magic from the perspective of going back to what we just talked about with content ideas? You feel pretty confident in saying, okay, I have this idea or I want to do this. Yes, I fully understand that this fits into this brand or it doesn't.
Well, I think a few months ago I would have said yes. And then I did a couple of different items that were fun to me. Like I put out a loungewear t-shirt collection that was
Hmm.
meant for Disney adults, celebrating different lounges, bars, and restaurants in the Disney parks. And then I went back to my mission statement and my vision, and I said, well, this doesn't really serve a solo traveler. It was fun, but didn't really serve my target audience. And so I kind of thought I really need to remember that and put everything through that filter.
Yeah, I saw that. And that's funny you mentioned that because I kind of before I thought when my first instinct when I saw that was, oh, that's really cool that she's able to do that. Maybe I need to look into that, some version of that. But that was kind
Yeah.
of before I understood now what you've told me about what the brand is.
Yeah, it's kind of like, like the shiny pennies. You get distracted by all the different things that could be, and reining that in and keeping the focus on my mission and my vision.
What do you do to kind of stay fresh? Let's just talk about your podcast. The next podcast that's coming up. Are you still as excited for episode 107? Do you still feel like you bring in something engaging, interesting at this point?
I don't. If anything, I've got more and more ideas. I keep a spreadsheet with running list of ideas, and the hardest part for me at this point is probably remembering how much I've covered already, and not repeating myself too much.
Yeah.
But just because I'm repeating myself in episode 107 doesn't mean someone's actually listened to episode 7 where I talked about the same thing. And of course, I'm putting a different spin on it because it's 3 years later.
How do you balance that? Hey, this may be somebody new listening to the podcast for the first time. Do they have the context they need to be able to actually enjoy this podcast or get something from it? How do you balance that?
I basically speak to the here and now. And with
Okay.
Disney, we're so fortunate that things change a lot with Disney, whether it's
Yeah.
the parks or cruises or you name it. So
Yeah.
even this November cruise I'm going on, I actually did this exact same itinerary on the same ship in 2019. And here we are, what are we, 4 years later, and there are a lot of changes to already talk about. And I've learned a lot too, because I've been on 5 more
Yeah.
cruises since then. So I have a lot more that I can share and add more value.
You talked about having a full-time job. How much time do you spend on Being the Magic a day?
Oh, a day? It really varies, I feel like, per day. I try to have an hour in the early morning. I get up early. I do kind of my morning routine of prayer, meditation, journaling, on good days, working out.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I try to spend an hour on Me and the Magic before I start my other work day. And then if I have like a lunch break, I might do something with Me and the Magic, or, with social, you can check that all the time. But of course, I can't get bogged down in that during the
Yeah.
work day. So, um, and then like we're talking right now in the evening. So most evenings I will do something with Me and the Magic, but not always. And then if sometimes I'll make up for that on the weekends.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Outside of actually work hours, do you take kind of forced breaks from Me and the Magic, or is it just you're always on essentially?
Well, I actually just moved. And so I took a very intentional podcast break, and I even put a program note out and said, the next couple weeks, you're not going to have a new episode. I'll be back on this date with the new episode. I'm moving, settling into the new house. And yeah, I think people are understanding, and I'm not going to lose listeners for that. But I still was on social media, and I have to take some breaks,
Yeah.
like even when I go on a cruise and I want to share on the cruise, I'm not going to share all the time. And I'm always tempted to be like, I got to grab my phone, got to do this. But sometimes I just need it for me. I just need to experience it, whether it's standing watching the fireworks on Main Street or just need to take it in for myself.
And that's where I was going. Have you reached the point, or do you have those points where you do feel like there is a pressure to engage, to produce?
No, I think, well, I guess number one, I want to make sure that what I'm putting out there is, and this is, I think, tricky for all creators. You're not just putting content out there to get something out there. You want it to be quality content. And I mean, I've seen, you on Instagram, you produce beautiful reels, and you've
Oh, come
got
on now.
you do, and they're gorgeous. And I thought, oh my gosh, I got to up my game.
No.
They're so
No.
gorgeous. But sometimes I do feel like, oh, I haven't gotten anything out today. I need to put something out there. And if I'm in the park, sometimes I do enjoy, if I'm by myself, especially sharing it and seeing feedback in that real time. And then sometimes I just want to go to Animal Kingdom and ride the safari by myself and chill.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Yeah.
So, where do you feel like in this journey? Where do you feel like you've made the biggest strides in the quality of what you produce, how you promote, how you
Mm.
engage? Where have you seen the biggest jumps from when you first started?
Certainly the podcast. I've learned a lot. I'm still learning, but as far as hopefully the quality and being open to different ideas as they come up, being more comfortable doing solo episodes too, because at first I felt a pressure to always have guests. And then I started intermixing that with solo episodes and also saying they don't have to be an hour long. It's okay if they're 20, 30, 40 minutes long,
Yeah,
kind of putting that mix in there and just being comfortable with hearing my voice was a new experience. I hadn't done that since the old answering machine days. So
it's easy to criticize the podcast thing, people who vlog, but it really does take talent, because when you hold that phone up, to your face, or you get in front of that mic and it's just you're running the show, it's a lot.
yes, that's one thing I still
Yeah,
am working to get more comfortable is just being on video. On my podcast is all audio, and am not comfortable with. I always feel like I'm bouncing people around if I'm walking them through the
sure,
parks. You know.
sure. Have you, on that front, have you ever really had to deal with any criticism? And does it ever impact the way, or what you produce, how you engage? Has that ever been a thing for you?
I don't think that I have had criticism so much as spammers
Hmm.
or just the either bots or um, yeah. I did have. I think there were a couple of comments on the community that I've had to delete and block a few people, but also I've been very fortunate. Yeah.
Where have you seen the most growth and engagement? Has it been I guess just based on the fact that it's the focus, has it been the podcast that you've seen the most growth in? Has it been your social media engagement? What does that look like today?
The podcast is kind of tricky because there's so many numbers to look at, right?
Right.
So the main numbers are total downloads, but then of course as you get more episodes, that number is just automatically going to go up as more people are subscribing and listening. So I'm looking at number of downloads in the first 7 days of an episode and the first 30 days of an episode.
So those are those are the real numbers. Those are the ones that matter.
Yeah, those are the metrics, and my understanding is, more for advertisers. If you're putting together kind of like a pitch letter to sponsors and advertisers, they're going to care about those numbers.
Gotcha.
So I'm focusing on that more. And one thing I don't do very well and need to improve on is repurposing old content. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but guess what? Everybody repeats
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah.
including all the stores that want us to buy from them, right? So I need to focus on that. But also the community. I'm really just loving how organically it's been growing. I'm up to 530 members as of today and just really happy with that growth.
Gotcha. Now, when you say, just for my clarification, when you say member, how do I become a member of that community?
Just go to meandthemagic.com/community and join. It's a Facebook group
Okay.
that's open to anyone
Yep.
and it's free. I will have Patreon coming soon that will give some added benefits to anybody that chooses to do that. I'm still working through what those tiers will contain for anybody
Yeah.
that's familiar with Patreon, just
Yeah.
some added bonuses. But yeah, the community is free and open.
What is going back quickly to your podcast metrics? What's your most popular podcast?
Oh gosh, most popular episode. Episode 100 was very popular, and I think that's because I had like 14 people on it,
Sure.
which
Sure.
is a great way to get your numbers up because everybody then
That'll
shares it out. Like,
that'll
listen
do
to
it.
me on
Yeah.
this episode. But certainly, I also have a series about moving to the magic, and my first one was called "I Did It." Meaning I moved to Orlando, and of course, I got emotional, which is always people I guess always appreciate that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a very popular one.
Yeah.
And everything with that series, I've got I think 4 now in that moving to the magic series, and a couple more coming up sharing moving tips and renting versus buying in the Orlando area. A lot of people have expressed interest in that.
Well, let's talk promotion. Are most of your efforts centered around the Facebook group and your podcast?
Yes and no. I do the email list, and that's something I'm working on growing more, because I actually did not have the newsletter for a couple of years, and recently started having it again and being consistent with it on a weekly basis. And I'm starting to play around with offering more exclusive content in the email newsletter. Um,
What's typically in the newsletter?
I will usually have a synopsis of what's gone on that week. So the podcast episode with a little write up from me that's unique to not the same as the show notes, not the same as what you'll find on the website. I'll have what events are coming up. I might have a little extra article or a solo travel tip or
Okay.
top five favorite things that I'm watching right now. Or usually, I don't want it to be too long, but I'll usually have like four or five little sections in there.
Tell me about the tools that you use. What are you using for your podcast, for your newsletter, for any kind of analytics that you're looking at?
Yeah, sure. I use Libsyn for the podcast, and I record interviews on Zoom, and
Okay.
then I edit myself on GarageBand on my Mac. And sometimes I'll put it through Auphonic
Okay.
for some audio quality balancing if I notice a big difference in that for some reason. There's an Audio Hero website that I get
Okay.
different songs from. So you want to make sure, the copyright, all that. And then I have a WordPress
Yeah.
site,
Yeah.
and use just standard plugins on that. And let's see, on email, I use MailChimp, but I'm actually about to switch over to ConvertKit.
All right. And you're using MailChimp to kind of manage your newsletter distribution.
Yeah, yeah, but I've heard that ConvertKit has a little few more bells and whistles, and yeah, I'm gonna switch over.
Um, as far as any kind of images or video that you produced, is there any kind of editor that you like to use?
I usually just do it on my phone
Okay.
and use on my iPhone, use the Photos app. I like Lightroom for photo editing,
Mm-hmm.
certainly, if I want to make it a real high quality photo or even play around some now. I mean, it's pretty amazing what they have now with the AI presets.
It is.
It
It
can
is.
make me look like a really good photographer. So,
Well, I mean, honestly, even and this sounds like an old man talking here, but I mean, just the quality of photo editing and especially video editing that's available on your phone.
yeah,
If I could have gone back to, if you'd have told me that would be a thing back in, when I was in high school in the late '90s,
yeah.
and we were trying to edit this 10-minute video on this cheap version of Avid that would crash every 5 minutes. Just the idea that you could produce what you could produce today, then it's unbelievable.
It is mind-boggling. Yeah.
Um,
And how much data we can store on this little phone, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Well, so do you do any kind of, you promote basically to your community, correct? Do you promote outside of that?
I've run Facebook ads and Instagram ads with varied success. I found for like increasing the email list and getting more Instagram followers, that giveaways has done really well.
Okay.
And I'd like to do more giveaways. But
So
yeah,
if you had to invest somewhere, the giveaways have been the most successful as far as just in your case, it would be newsletter signups.
yes, and
Okay.
Instagram followers. I've been
Okay.
fortunate that I will see an uptick and they don't really drop off.
Okay.
So, I mean, obviously some drop off and others come in, but I've never really gone through a big period that I've had a big drop. It's been a slow grow, but I haven't had a big drop. So,
What's the most rewarding part in all of this?
oh gosh. Um, Well, for one, a creative outlet. I just really enjoy doing this and the podcast. And I've created my own community of fellow entrepreneurs, people that I probably never would have connected with otherwise. And that's largely because of Lou, Mangello and his Momentum conference and the masterminds and all that. And then the community for me and the magic. I mean, there are people in there that I never would have met otherwise. And it's just really special to all connect because of our love of is it solo travel, Disney, or whatever the case is, and to just have that in common and support each other.
When I interact with the Me and the Magic, the brand, however I do that, whether that's through Instagram, Facebook, listening to your podcast, what do you want the takeaway for me to be from that experience?
I would love for it to be that you find me and any guest that I have on to be trustworthy, and that you're inspired to take some action, whether that's sharing the podcast with somebody who you think might be interested in traveling solo, or you yourself are curious about it, or you are unsure about how you're going to budget for that next trip, and maybe it helps you to do that. Anything that helps you to experience something that is on your wish list, because we only get one life and time is ticking away. We're already the second full week of July, for crying out loud. How'd that happen?
I know. Two more questions. So give me something you wish you kind of would have understood a little better, or known more, or understood more when you first started out.
I think I wish I'd understood more that, and I learned this actually through working with a life and leadership coach, that sometimes B- work is okay. It does not all have to be completely perfect, and people will not notice things that I notice.
Is there anything in particular you would for someone looking kind of to do the same or something similar to what you do today? What advice or what tip would you have for them?
Number one, to go for it. You got nothing to lose, and your voice is certainly unique and valuable, and you will find your tribe. Somebody out there needs to hear what you have to say. So it's same as solo travel. Like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
If you need help planning your upcoming theme park vacation, I recommend reaching out to, me. I've spent years learning the ins and outs of theme park vacation planning and would love to help you plan your next visit to destinations like Walt Disney World, Disneyland, and Universal Orlando. Get started by going to nextstopaaron.com and clicking Plan a Trip. So I hope you enjoyed hearing from Amanda. I thought her approach toward building a brand in the theme park community by building a subset or a niche brand to serve was just genius, and it seems to be working really well for her. And maybe that's a strategy you can explore if you know of a niche within the community that's underserved today. So we're 6 episodes in, 4 episodes left for this season of Coasters and Community. I hope you're really enjoying it, and I hope you're learning something. I know I am. I've learned something from every guest that we've had on this show. We'll see you next time.